would come as a successor to capitalism. Next is a second extract from Karl Marx, which covers a similar ground to the first extract. This one's from the third volume of Capital, in chapter 47, on the genesis of capitalist ground rent. What this extract illustrates is who the mode of production is linked to classes in society. Once again, economics is not a neutral science or an allocation of resources in a void, but is a social creation. Quote, "The specific economic form in which the unpaid surplus is pumped out of the direct producers determines the relationship of rulers and ruled, as it grows directly out of production itself and in turn reacts upon it as a determining element. Upon this, however, is founded the entire formation of the economic community which grows out of the production relations themselves, thereby simultaneously its specific political form. It is always the direct relationship of the owners of the conditions of production to the direct producers, a relations always naturally corresponding to a particular stage in the development of the methods of labor and thereby its social productivity, which reveals the innermost secret and hidden basis of the entire social structure, and with it the political form, a relation of sovereignty and dependence, in short, the specific form of the state." This quote has the advantage of introducing class, as defined by relation to the means of production, into the analysis. In all class societies, there are people who do the necessary work to keep that society going. They are the exploited class because the ruling class lives at their expense.
Consider this. For the past 30 years, the productivity of American workers has increased by 70.
Why? So problem is,
how is the value that's produced but not consumed in production costs, how is this surplus distributed and reinvested? You know, there are only two small select groups in all of North America who believe there's such a thing as surplus value, and that's the Marxists and the capitalists. In fact, the capitalists even have a term for it. They call it added value, or value added. They're always talking about that with each other. They don't talk to you about it, but with each other. The actual technical term is value added in manufacture. In 1955, for instance, General Motors estimated that an average auto worker added value of $150,000 in 1 year of work, while he was paid only $38,000, or about 1/4 of the value added. Now, General Motors doesn't publicize that very widely. As I say, it was in one of their in-house trade publications. The added value, ladies and gentlemen, the added value is what it's all about. Does it go primarily for the private enrichment of an owning class, or for collective betterment, human services, and community needs? Around that issue, many important political economic battles have been fought and are still being fought. Look at the phony energy crisis we're having right now. PG&E crying poverty, bankruptcy, rate hiking us into poverty. What happened to the $5 billion in earnings, PG&E, that you had not long ago? Well, we couldn't develop new energy sources with that money because that money went to something more essential. It went to our shareholders. They walked off with billions. And now the company cries poverty and needs to be bailed out by the greatest of all financiers of free market capitalism, the greatest of all benefactors of free market capitalism. That's the taxpayers and the consumers, who are one and the same guys, us. You know, it reminds me, David Roderick summed it up. David Roderick was president of U.S. Steel Corporation years ago. And when he was president, he said, U.S. Steel is not in the business of making steel. It's in the business of making profits. And you know, your heart leaps when a moment of truth, a flicker of truth comes out of these guys, you know. I mean, that's a fantastic, beautiful statement. It's not in the business of making steel, it's in the business of making profits. And that's what PG&E is in effect saying. We're not, Pacific Gas and Electric is not in the business of producing and distributing gas and electric. It's in the business of making profits. And then we have a governor in Sacramento who acts just like this president in Washington. He announces a crisis and goes into action and uses it as an opportunity to give bailouts and payoffs to the rich and powerful. So we're exploited not only as workers, the exploitation process doesn't stop there. It goes on, and we're exploited as taxpayers and consumers. The pay you get has already had the surplus value taken out of it. But then other things are taken out. Do you remember your first paycheck? When you think back, way back those days, remember that first paycheck you ever got? And you looked at it and you said, there must be some mistake. I mean, if this is supposed to be for 2 weeks, it looks more like 1 week. You say, no, here's the other week. We took off for that. We took over that. So the exploitation goes on, you see.
You might think that New York Yankees infielder Alex Rodriguez, baseball's highest paid player at $25 million a year, would be right at home among the richest people in the world. After all, he makes about $45,000 for each time at bat. But on the playing field of the super rich, he's a bush leaguer. A-Rod would have to play at $25 million a year until he's 100 to make as much money as James Simons last year alone. Who's James Simons? He's the world's top hedge fund manager. He, quote-unquote, earned $1.7 billion last year. The top 25 hedge fund managers made a combined $14 billion last year, according to industry magazine Alpha. To get some idea of how much money this is, consider that these 25 individuals raked in more in 1 year than the national income of Jordan with its 5.9 million people, or enough to pay the salaries of New York City's 80,000 public school teachers for nearly 3 years. On average, these hedge fund honchos made $443 per second last year. Every second of every day of every week of every month. In the minute and a half it's taken me to read this article, a top hedge fund manager just made $39,000. When ABC World News felt compelled to report on this story in late April, what angle did the coverage focus on? Did the report note the contrast between the enormous wealth of these 25 individuals and the 37 million Americans living below the poverty line? Or ask about the wildly diverging incomes of executives and workers? No. The pressing issue in the judgment of ABC News was how hard it would be to spend all that money in a year. So ABC's reporter talked to a personal shopping assistant at Bloomingdale's who suggested an $1,800 set of bed sheets. Then off to a grocery store whose entire inventory amounted to about $2.6 million. If Simons felt that hungry, he could buy almost 2 whole stores each day of the year. The ABC reporter concluded that it would be hard to spend all that money, but never once suggested that there might be something wrong when Simons takes home in an hour what 92 minimum wage workers make in a year. In fact, the only judgment offered during the segment defended the obscene payday enjoyed by Simons and other hedge fund managers. They buy when nobody's willing to buy. They sell when nobody's willing to sell, said Stephen Brown of New York University's Stern School of Business. They take on great risk, and they deserve high returns for doing so. For working Americans, work comes with real risks and much less pay. Consider the 9 workers in a microwave popcorn plant in Jasper, Missouri, who came down with a rare life-threatening disease that was destroying their lungs. The cause was traced to a new additive being used to give the popcorn a more buttery taste. But OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, didn't step up plant inspections or order new safety standards for other businesses using the additive, even as more workers became ill. In late April, the director of OSHA told Congress he would prefer a safety bulletin and a plan to inspect a few dozen of the thousands of food plants that use the additive. If this sounds like a less than muscular response to a significant workplace health threat, consider that OSHA's new plan comes 7 years after the 9 workers first fell ill. This is the reality for working Americans exploited by the hedge fund managers and other corporate executives, resisting stronger health and safety standards, cutting corners on standards that do exist, keeping wages low, and pushing the cost of health care onto workers. All of it makes for fatter bottom lines and market returns. Since 2001, wages and salaries have captured an exceptionally small share of the total growth in national income that has occurred in the current period, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Only 34% of the overall increase in national income since the end of 2001 has gone to increases in workers' pay, a smaller fraction than in any other expansion since World War II. For the first time on record, corporate profits have captured a larger share of the income growth in a recovery, 46% of it, than wages and salaries have. In the last 15 years, CEO compensation has mushroomed by 300%, while wages have inched up by 5%. If wages had kept up with CEO pay, the average worker would be bringing home $110,136 instead of $27,460. This has produced a situation that increasing numbers of people would like to see changed. Some 66% feel that the money and wealth in this country should be more evenly distributed among a larger percentage of the people, according to an early April Gallup poll. 37% said they thought that there was too many rich people, the highest percentage since Gallup began asking the question in 1990. While 49% said that government should redistribute wealth by heavy taxes on the rich, a much larger proportion than agreed with that statement in 1939 at the end of the Great Depression. The question is not whether there are sufficient resources to lift people, not just in the U.S., but globally, out of poverty conditions. There certainly are. The question is when those who are shut out of prosperity will come together and demand their share.
One New York restaurant now has just the thing, a $175 hamburger.
It comes from pampered, beer-fed cows that get daily massages. Forget bacon, this one sports foie gras. And in shorts over the top, he sprinkles gold leaf.
The burger is very popular with the hedge fund crowd. Because $175 is a small price to pay to literally crack gold.
And that concludes this edition of Seeing Red Radio, the radio show with an international revolutionary socialist perspective. We come to you every Thursday from 8 until 9 right here on Valley Free Radio. Please stay tuned. Coming up next, the music of Flywheel. We'll conclude remembering the lives of Billie Holiday and John Coltrane, who passed away on this day in 1959 and 1967, respectively. Have a good night.